Hi, my name is Scott White, and I'm a PhD student at York University in the Critical Disability Studies program. I started off with an interest in work and disability around 2008-2009 in a project with the AIDS Committee of Toronto, which was also in partnership with the Job Opportunity Information Network, JOIN. And since then, I've worked in employment support programs in the community, mostly funded through TEST, Toronto Employment and Social Services, and Service Canada. And about 4 years ago, I started studying at York, and now I'm in a place where I'm starting a research project of my own, and I've entitled this project WorkABILITY, which I'm presenting on today. So a goal of my doctoral research is related to the Pan-Canadian Strategy for Disability in Work and a conference sub-theme of making inclusive workplaces a reality. And through this, I hope to gain further insight on the lived experience of people with disabilities at work. As a project, it is concerned with both sustainable employment and career progression. So this short presentation is a segue to my doctoral research project on employment in Canada and specifically concerned with the obstacles that people with disabilities face on the job. It seeks to explore aspects of limited career advancement within the context of accessibility, utilizing terminology of barriers defined in the Accessible Canada Act. The project is currently in early stages of development. The main research questions will involve gathering feedback on factors that limit career opportunity and also looking at what resources people mobilize to sort of navigate the barriers they face. And I'm in the process of looking at the research tools, which will also include questions on COVID-19. And I'm, through this presentation, hoping to get feedback from people who are experts in this area. So WorkABILITY as a project seeks to understand people with disability in Canada with long-term workforce attachment in leadership roles, as well as employment retention and career advancement related to accessibility, an accessible workplace for people with disabilities. Accessibility barriers related to the workplace and employment opportunities according to people with disabilities, which is to say, to understand people's lived experience. The barrier-free workplace as an accessible workplace. That speaks to the language that's used in policy, really it talks about this barrier-free workplace being the accessible workplace. So why investigate employment retention among individuals with long-term workforce attachment? Well, people with disabilities in Canada identify a lack of career advancement opportunities in the workplace, so that's a great reason. Overall, people with disabilities occupy far fewer supervisory and management or leadership roles in the labor market. People with disabilities also continue to experience higher rates of unemployment and more frequent job loss. So understanding the barriers to career advancement is important to people with disabilities because promotion at work is often associated with more responsibility, status, higher income, improved benefits, managing teams and projects, and opportunities for high-level decision-making within organizations. So people with disabilities who experience success at work are really well positioned to inform best practices in employment retention and also to give feedback on their experience with barriers to their own career advancement. So why study it in the context of barriers and accessibility? So I mentioned just before this that this federal legislation that's come out in 2019 just picks up this word stock about barriers and discusses accessibility as a barrier-free workplace. So provinces and territories have also aligned their policies to exactly the same language. So accessibility is a language about barriers and concerned with fostering a culture of inclusion at work. And so they use, how they break this down is into physical barriers, technological barriers, attitudinal, anything communications related, or the result of a policy or practice with linkages to being hired, retained, or advanced at work. So how will the topic of COVID-19 be included? Two questions I hope to include about people's experience with that, if it's interrupted their work in some way or some new barrier has evolved as a result of the pandemic. And I will discuss it in the final report. What are the primary questions of the research? So I have three right now. What disabling barriers do people with disabilities encounter that limit their career advancement? How do people with disabilities mobilize resources to navigate those barriers? How has COVID-19 affected accessibility in the workplace? What theoretical frameworks are associated with this study? Well, the most significant theoretical explanation for workplace inequity for people with disabilities continues to be rooted in historical materialism. Intensive competition in a capitalist society contributes to oppression, and it limits opportunities to more fully participate. So it's also situated within the theoretical framework of the social model that sees employment barriers as socially constructed, and within the minority model of disability, it sees people with disabilities as an entitative group where society contours a policy response toward workplace inequity. While policy approaches are entitative, this research strives to understand the lived experience of people with disabilities at work and the barriers they face. And in terms of a methodology, I hope to use an interpretive qualitative approach, analyzing common themes discussed by people with disabilities about the barriers they face. I also want to use semi-structured interviews comprised of 10 to 12 specific questions related to the barriers. So how will the interview questions be developed? Well, this is part of the process. I have already spoke with a few people about what questions would be appropriate and looked at some other people's research, but I'm hoping in presenting I will get some further advice and feedback, or somebody connect to me to steer me in a direction to clarify some things. I don't know if there will be a pilot required, but I'm putting that out there that, could I pilot some kind of process for questions that would be useful. So I have an interview protocol that I've put together with some common things that one would expect to see in a research project that's looking at this topic. One is background information, a job role, career advancement and leadership, barriers and accessibility, social networking, identity, the COVID-19 questions, recommendation and advice, and then a closing question to sort of wrap up and get some feedback from any participant who feels I might have missed something. So the questions more explicitly are, can you tell me about yourself? Can you tell me about your work? Can you tell me about the roles that you've had in your career advancement? And then the questions about the experienced barriers and how they've navigated those barriers. Also social networking. So this has come up in previous research where social networking, both within organizations and also external organizations, appears to be quite important to look at. So I would like to gather some information on that. The question related to that: do you feel that your age, gender identity, socioeconomic status, so getting this identity information about participants, and then the COVID questions, it says, has the pandemic affected your work? And if so, has it created any new barriers, and what are they? And what advice would you give to somebody with a disability starting a career? And then finally, are there any important aspects of career advancement that you'd still like to share? And so that's kind of where I'm at with developing the survey or the interview questions. Feedback I'm seeking from others, deciding on the use of an existing tool, because I've looked at both using a survey, using interviews, using interview and surveys, and I'm leaning more towards the interview and gaining some more insight to this sort of storytelling around people's experience with barriers in the workplace and how they describe them, and also how they might reflect and be compared to some of the language that's used in accessibility policy. If they're physical, or are they attitudinal, or these kinds of things. So I'm trying to determine which questions will define a clear, attainable goal for the research project. And anybody out there in the universe wants to contact me with some input or advice, I can be contacted at swhite@urq.ca or by phone 416-559-4469. And that concludes my presentation. Feel free to reach out and make contact with me. I hope your online conference experience is excellent. Take care and be well.